Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm the Jaywalker. Today, we're back down in the creepy basement. Time for a ghost story for a Saturday. First one truly with Hank with me. Today's story's got a lot going for it. Ghosts, grave robbing, exile. Let's check the story out. So, today's the story of Jean Baptiste. Now, there's stuff that we don't know about Mr. Baptiste, and we'll kind of skirt around that here before we get to the stuff that we do know. So some of the stuff that we don't know is where exactly he was from. The 1860 census had him listed as having been born in Ireland, but according to stories, he didn't speak English very well and had told people that he was from Italy. Other people thought he might have been French, but we just don't know. We have no idea. Some of the things we do know was that at the time of his emigration to America, he was living in Australia. He went from Australia in the late part of April of 1855, landed in Honolulu, stayed in Honolulu until February of 1856, where he went to San Francisco. Now, he stayed in San Francisco for at least a little while. We know that in 1859, or by 1859, he was living in Utah, in Salt Lake City, up in the Avenues neighborhood, which is very close to Salt Lake City Cemetery. He was also working as a gravedigger for the cemetery, and that's kind of where we get into some of the weirdness going on with his story. In 1862, there were two men who were accused or caught beating a gentleman here in Salt Lake City. These two gentlemen ran. And in the process of running, they were being chased by the police. At some point, confrontation, these two men were shot and killed. One of them, his name was Moroni Clausen. Now, Mr. Clausen apparently was indigent, didn't have any money, and no one came forward right off to pay for his burial. There was a police officer, Henry Heath, who took care of the funeral expenses. And things were okay until at some point Mr. Clausen's family came forward to claim his body and have him exhumed from Salt Lake City Cemetery and taken out to Draper City Cemetery out on the south end of the Salt Lake Valley. And in the process of exhuming him, they found not only was Mr. Clausen buried upside down, but he was naked. Mr. Clausen's family was, for all intents and purposes, very upset with good reason. And so Mr. Clausen's brother went and confronted Officer Heath. How could you do this to my brother? Why would you disrespect him in such a way? And, Officer Heath, I have no idea what happened. We need to go and let's go and take care of this. So they went to talk first with the Sexton Little of the Salt Lake City Cemetery. And Sexton Little, again, was also just flummoxed and had absolutely no idea what happened. He says, well, you'll need to go and talk with Mr. Baptiste, who dug the grave. They go to Jean's house. He's not there. His wife is, where, upon talking with her, they notice a number of boxes with soiled, dirty clothing sticking out. And upon further investigation, it contained clothing and jewelry and other things taken from the graves that they had come to find out, they came to find out that Mr. Baptiste had robbed, totaling 300 or more in total. So they arrested Mr. Baptiste on desecration of graves and a number of other grave offenses, pun intended. Took him into custody, and with all the belongings, clothing, jewelry, and other things that they had recovered from Mr. Baptiste's home, they laid out on the lawn of the Salt Lake City courthouse to let families of those who those items may have belonged to come in and claim them if they could. Now, what to do with Mr. Baptiste? He, was obviously guilty. He confessed and was begging for his life. The police and those in charge at the time went to then Territorial Governor Brigham Young. Said, "What do we do?" Brigham said, "Well, this isn't. It's not necessarily infractions to necessarily hang him, kill him, or keep him locked up for forever, but we can't really have him around polite society." And so their final decision on punishment was to exile Mr. Baptiste to an island in the middle of the Great Salt Lake, Fremont Island. Now, there were not necessarily people living on the island, but they were using the island as grazing land for their cattle. There was a structure on like a barn, a shack on the land that there's the Miller family who used the land for grazing. They kept some provisions there for while they were out checking on their cattle. They go out to Antelope Island, which still does have a causeway or a road to go out to the island, and then they took him by boat from Antelope Island to Fremont Island and dropped him off. After a year or at least a few months, they go back out. They had talked with the Miller family, and obviously he'd found the shack and had used probably most of the provisions there from the shack that they had. And they go back a while later, and they find the shack dismantled, complete trash, and Mr. Baptiste gone. They also found one of the cattle dead. None of the meat gone, but partially skinned. So what they figure is that Jean had dismantled the shack and used the hide of this cow that he killed to craft himself a raft and sail off the island, or paddle off the island. But he was never seen again. A couple years later, along the south end of the Great Salt Lake, someone found a corpseless skull. A couple years after that, they found a headless corpse, a skeleton. Interesting thing about the skeleton, all this was found on the south end of the lake. The interesting thing about the skeleton was that it apparently had either shackles or like a ball and chain hooked around the ankle. Now, according to the story, they did not shackle or chain Mr. Baptiste up in any way. Again, I don't know how true that is, but the story from the officers and those who carried out his punishment, said that he wasn't shackled. Now, the legend with this too is that the ghost of Mr. Baptiste still wanders the south end of the Great Salt Lake, between Salt Lake and Chihuahua counties, possibly looking to get retribution or just to get himself together. If you like today's story, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends. Join me again here on the Jaywalker, where we'll find some more cool, fascinating stories about here in Utah, other places. We'll see you soon.